Good morning. It is April the 14th at 3:35, and I think actually I can't tell if I'm live right now or not. Yeah, okay. Good morning. It's 3:35 on Tuesday, April the 14th, and this is day 2 of this live journal I'm creating to try and teach and inspire people. I think maybe show people some of the strategies that I use to go through challenging times, and a lot of people I know consider these to be very challenging times, and certainly they are. We've been on this shelter in place order for the past several weeks, and it's something that I have been used to. I've been used to living in quarantine, primarily because I was in prison for 26 years. So living alone and working alone and staying motivated alone is not something that's new to me. In fact, it's something that prison really conditioned me to do. Uh, while I was incarcerated, I had to learn the strategies that would allow me to stay motivated and stay disciplined as days turn into weeks, weeks turn into months, months turn into years, and years turn into decades. And way the lessons that I learned through that journey have helped me since I've come back to society, and I'm absolutely convinced they can help anybody that's going through a difficult time. I had to reincorporate these patterns and strategies um, really right away because when I came back to society in August of 2013, I really didn't exist in the world. I had no credit. The world had changed. It had been 9,500 days since that I'd served in prison, and everything was different. There was technology. When I came home, when I went in, there was no internet, there was no email, there was no YouTube, there was no Facebook, there were no microphones or editing software or any of these tools that are so extraordinary because um, they allow us to connect. They allow us to connect with other people, and that was something that I really needed to do while I was in prison. I needed to think about ways that I could penetrate the walls or cross over the walls and connect with the people that I wanted to meet in society. Now, in day one's video, the first one, I spoke about how a book inspired me to want to, well, first of all, to change the way that I thought, help me build a stronger mindset and stop thinking about the challenges that I was facing, but instead start thinking about the 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 things that I could do given the resources that I had. And I didn't have a lot of resources while I was in prison. Um, I had a pen and I had a paper. And after I read that book, which I said yesterday was The Republic by Socrates, it helped me understand that I had been living by a bad philosophy. Instead of thinking about ways that I could contribute meaningfully and measurably to the world, I was thinking about how unfair a system was that was going to keep me incarcerated for, well, all of my 20s, all of my 30s, all of my 40s. And that was the wrong way to look at it. What after reading that book and learning about Socrates' plight while he was in jail waiting to be executed, and reading about his response, that instead of thinking about what was going to happen to him, he thought about the principles by which he lived and the ways that he could contribute to society. And I remember lying in that cell and thinking, what could I do to contribute to society while I'm living in here? And that's what led to that 3-part plan that I spoke about in day one's journal, which was I had to think about not what I wanted, but really what would the people that I wanted to connect with expect from me? They would expect me to, uh, if I wanted them to give me an opportunity when I came home, they would expect me to focus on building a better education, demonstrating that because an education reflects, I think to some, that a person doesn't want to live as a criminal. And the second is those people that I expected to meet at some point in the future would want me to contribute in meaningful, measurable ways to society. And three, they would want me to have a stronger support network. If I could live in accordance with those three principles, those three values, I believed that I would have a better shot when I came home. And that's the same strategy that I'm using right now. I'm thinking about what what would I like my life to be in a year from now, in 3 years from now, in 5 years from now? What would I like it to be? And I can tell you that what I would like it to be would be I could generate my own income, my own business, regardless of where I am. And how do I do it? I do it by using these tools that allow me to connect. When I'm starting this daily journal, this being resilient page, I'm starting from nothing. And in later episodes, I'll reveal why I am starting with nothing, because I've had a phenomenal first 5 years of liberty since getting out of prison after 26 years that I'll talk about. And then I suffered a major setback where I was embroiled in litigation because of a bad investment that I made. And it ended up costing me millions of dollars worth of assets that I had accumulated since I'd come home from prison. And now I'm having to rebuild. So I'm rebuilding, and I'm just saying that's okay. I may be a shelter in place phenomenon. I may be living, may have lost a lot of my assets, but I've learned a lot. I'm in a much stronger position, certainly, than I was when I got out of prison. And where am I good? But the question is, what can I do with the resources that I have to build something bigger, build something stronger, use this time productively? And you see, I'm using the same strategies that I used while I was in prison. I wake up early. I am very disciplined throughout the day. I produce an extraordinary amount of content. I'm hyper focused and driven to achieve and document the journey so that others will see I'm not just talking about it, I'm actually doing it. And that's something I think anybody else can do. You don't have to talk about it, you have to do it. And if you have that plan laid out for you and you execute on that plan, your life is going to be different. It certainly happened for me during these first couple of weeks since I've been on a work from home shelter, just like everybody else basically in the country. And today is going to be no different. It's following that same principled path of defining success, creating a plan, putting priorities in place, and then executing the plan every single day. So when I was incarcerated, though, I didn't really understand how I was going to do that. I told you I'd come up with those three principles: education, contribution, and building a strong support network. But I didn't really understand how I was going to do it. So I had to put some very clearly defined parameters on that because my sentence was going to be so long. I mean, I was facing at the time life without the possibility of parole. I didn't even know what that meant. I'd never been incarcerated before. I was 23 years old. I was locked inside of the Pierce County Jail in Seattle. And I remember lying in that prison cell, putting my hands behind my back on that cot and thinking, okay, someday I'm going to sit across the table from an employer. Someday I'm going to sit across the table from a probation officer. Someday I'm going to sit across the table from other people who are going to have influence over my life. And there's nothing I can do about the past. There's nothing I can do to change the fact that I made really bad decisions as a young man and I sold cocaine. There's nothing I can do to review to change the fact that authorities arrested me, charged me with serious crimes, put me in prison, and I was about to be sentenced. I couldn't change that, but I could change what I did every single day. I could, if I started sowing the right seeds today, I could begin laying the groundwork for what I would experience in the months, years, and decades ahead. And but I couldn't think that far ahead because I didn't know how long I was going to be in prison. Just like right now, I don't know how long I'm going to be on shelter in place. But I know that if I use my time wisely, if I clearly define what it is that I want to achieve, I can put plans in place to build a pathway towards a more successful journey. A journey that I can look back and say, well, I've created things out of work, out of a deliberate pursuit. Visualize, plan, prioritize, and execute. Now, I don't think I have the ability on Facebook Live to share my screen, at least not just using the very simple um, the very simple tools that I see on this plate. Maybe later today I will look for a platform that I can use. I know that my partner Justin Paperny uses a platform that allows them to share the screen, and I may look for something like that because I'd like to share with you some of the screens. But I publish so much content that it's easy to find the story. Anyway, let me continue because when I was in prison, I had to put into perspective how am I going to measure my daily progress? And that's what led me to come up with these very clearly defined goals that would make my commitment to focusing on education, focusing on contributing to society, and focusing on building a strong support network self evident. And those were very clear goals. Very clear goals. We hear this acronym of SMART goals. They have to be very specific. They have to be measurable. They have to be action oriented. They have to be realistic. You have to be able to have some modicum of possibility that you're going to achieve them. And they have to be time bound. SMART, specific, measurable, attainable, I know action oriented, results are realistic and time bound. SMART, SMART. So I didn't know the concept of SMART back then, but I did know that I'd have to put some type of parameter on what I was going to achieve in order to demonstrate my commitment to education, contribution, and building a support network. And so I focused on the first 10 years. What would be different in my life in the first 10 years of imprisonment? And I just said, well, Cal, if people are going to see me as somebody who made a commitment to education during those first 10 years, I'm going to find a way to get a university degree. That became paramount. And all of a sudden, it's specific, it's measurable, it's action oriented. I can't achieve it without doing something. I thought it was realistic. I gave myself a 10-year window. I didn't know how I would do it, but in 10 years, I would figure it out. And it was time bound. Either I would do it or I wouldn't. The second was to how was I going to demonstrate that I was contributing to society even though I was living in prison? And that was a little more difficult to figure out because I I didn't know what um, I could do. I mean, I was still in jail. I hadn't even been to prison yet when I was coming up with these concepts. I hadn't even been sentenced yet. I was just sitting in jail reading Socrates and thinking about, okay, what could I do? And I decided I could become a published author. Now, I didn't know how I was going to be a published author. At that time in my life, I'd never written much of anything, certainly not long form content. I didn't know how to string sentences into paragraphs and then paragraphs into pages or organize thoughts in long form content. But I believed I could learn. And the third component was a network. I made a commitment that said I'm going to find 10 people. Well, back that up. How do I turn that into a SMART goal? I said within 10 years, I will find a way to become a published author. Because if I'm a published author, it's self-evident that I'm contributing to society. And the third component was I have to build a strong support network. And I would do that by finding 10 people that I didn't know and that didn't know me, and I had to persuade those 10 people to believe in me. That was my goal. Those were very clear and specific goals that I would achieve within the first 10 years. And it made all the difference in my life. Within those, before I hit 10 years, by the time I was in my eighth year, not only did I have one college degree, I had an undergraduate degree from Mercer University and a master's degree from Hofstra University. Because I pursued that path, I became a published author within my first 10 years, and that led to a thriving publishing career, so to speak, from prison, where I only didn't have computers. All I had to write manuscripts with nothing more than a pen and a paper. And the third component was building a support network. Because of those two, I was able to bring people into my life. And that made a huge difference. That strategy of being very principled decisions, values-based decisions, clearly defined goals, and very specific, tangible objectives that I wanted to meet resulted in more people coming into my life. And so, in Jim Collins's book, Good to Great, he wrote about, these synergies that work together. And, when things work together, it's very hard to get off the ground. But if you keep applying yourself, it becomes easier and it becomes moving and gets momentum on its own. He uses this analogy of this disc. It's moving a 5,000-pound disc, as I recall, that's balanced on a spindle or a divot of some sorts. And I said, getting that disc to turn is really hard. But once you get it rolling and gets it moving, it takes on an energy of its own and it starts to spin. And that's the same pattern that I've found throughout life. Once we start moving in the right direction, it may be hard to get off the ground, but once we get going, it becomes second nature to us. The progress becomes second nature to us, and opportunities begin to open. So that's the same principles that I used at home. I started this journey um, with the stay at work from home order, and I began thinking about, okay, what do I have to do while I'm here? I've got to find a way to generate my own revenues and and fulfill client service work. If I'm going to be here for a month or for 3 months or for 6 months or for 9 months. And again, it was just laying the groundwork. Well, I have to figure out how to connect. And so you can see on my various platforms, I'm publishing this on this new page that I created called Being Resilient, because I wanted people to see how how I am using these principles of resilience to grow during to recover from a difficult time. What are the difficult times in my life? Well, the the one that we're living in a pandemic is, that's something that none of us controlled. But there are some challenges that I'm having to overcome that I control, that I made bad decisions that put me in a bad position. You can find those, a lot of that information on my personal website at michaelsantos.com. I think if you tap into the about section of michaelsantos.com, it is, I believe it's my story or something like that. You can read about a lawsuit that I got embroiled in, because I made a bad investment. I invested 1.4 million of my own capital plus another 2 million from families and friends into an investment in Costa Rica. I invested with somebody into somebody's company that I met him in prison when I was in prison. I didn't know this person uh, to be anything other than a successful business guy, or what I consider to be a successful business. Remember, I'd been in prison for 26 years, and it was inspiring to me to interview and meet people who had built businesses that had grown into entities that generated tens of millions of dollars in revenues and provided jobs for hundreds of people. So I would interview these people and write books about them, and they inspired me. And one of those people was a real estate developer, who developed properties outside of the United States. And we become friends. I've only known him as somebody who wanted to help me. And as I became more successful, I invested in his company, invested in a new development that he was going to make in Costa Rica. Again, I put my own money up, but after putting that money into the investment in Costa Rica, a couple of months later, my friend was sued by the Federal Trade Commission. And when he was sued by the Federal Trade Commission, that lawsuit resulted in all of my assets being frozen, or rather, all of the assets that I invested in the venture being frozen. So, in a moment, I had gone from having $5 million in assets to having 1.4 million of those assets frozen in an account by the federal government. I retained counsel. I tried to sue the developer to get my money back. The federal government was not pleased with me suing the developer because he was embroiled in a receivership, and they responded or retaliated by suing me and making me a defendant in his case. And the way that they could make me a defendant in his case was really quite simple. I was in prison with him. And once a person goes to prison, that person can't really escape the challenges of his past. I never deceived anybody. I never made money from anybody. I had no control over his company. I had no authority over his company. Nobody in his company reported to me in any way. but he was my friend and I had a relationship with him. And I was very public, as I am about everything, and very transparent about my efforts to build an investment career around his business. And that resulted in the Federal Trade Commission bringing me into the lawsuit. And when they did that, they didn't only freeze the 1.4 million I put up, but they froze the other another $3 million in assets that I had in California. And so that litigation carried me all through 2019. Ultimately, I rather than continuing to go through litigation for which could last for many, many years, I decided, you know what? I've started from nothing before. It's time for me to start from nothing again. I'm just going to settle this and move on. So I walked away from $5 million in assets in January of 2020 and said, I'll just document the journey. I started with nothing coming out of prison and built, and I'm going to start from nothing again. And I'm going to do it through this process of being resilient. Began enrolling in courses. And one of the courses I enrolled in it's cost me $400 a month. It's the right, I think it's $400 a month. It's the digital marketer course by Ryan Dice, which I find to be an extraordinary use of time. Every day I watch these videos and I learn more about digital marketing. And that's what prompted me. In fact, watching those videos is what prompted me to start the Being Resilient page. While I was here, then I tried to bring my wife into this venture with me. She doesn't always get up as early as I get up, but together we then made a decision to invest in new equipment. So I have this new camera and this new microphone and this new software, and I invest the time to learn how to create content and edit content, both video content, audio content, written content. I publish. And my thoughts are, well, I can use all of this technology by mastering this to provide a service to other businesses, which is what I am doing. So every day I'm continuing the same pattern that I used while I was in prison. I never ask anybody to do anything that I'm not doing. I document the journey and I produce uh, content, which becomes a digital asset that I believe will help me build my work from home business. But I don't talk about it. I do it and I learn and I invest and I strive and I get up early and I work and I don't need anybody to tell me what to do. Those were the lessons that got me through prison. You have to invest in yourself. Is what I told myself. I have to be incredibly disciplined. I have to create assets or value out of nothing more than my intellectual property. And I will continue pursuing that path and revealing the journey of what I am doing. So as I did yesterday, I told you what my plans were to get through a very productive day of working from home. And yesterday, I even published some of the work. Instead of doing a recap in the evening, I filmed an episode where I was recording one of the books that I've written onto into an audio format that becomes a part of our Prison Professors podcast. And I just wanted to show people this is how you do it. It's just work. It's all of this. It's just work. It's just staying disciplined. It's just staying focused. It's just putting a plan in place, putting priorities down, and executing the plan, and making the execution of your day consistent with what you said is important to you. If you say that you want to build a work from home business, then you have to create a disciplined strategy that will help you get there. And right now, I'm not only doing it for myself, but I'm creating these digital programs and these digital assets for other ventures and other entities. And that's what I would encourage you to do. During this stay at home business, I've generated several different entities that have generated tens of thousands of dollars in revenues to support this venture every day. And every day I invest more. I invest more. Why? Because I believe that if I continue to execute on this model, I will create something of value. And it takes energy, it takes discipline, it takes commitment, and it takes focus. And I hope that you are able to find that discipline and focus and understanding that we don't all start at the same level. I started inside of a jail cell with nothing more than a commitment to emerge successfully. And because I executed on this model, I became stronger. When I got out of prison, I had nothing but all of the training that I had done while I was in prison. That training led me to create opportunities that resulted in more than $5 million in assets, more than a few $1 million in equity, um, and then I lost it all. So it's okay, because we can start with nothing, but if we invest in ourselves and if we create a plan that will take us to the next level, we can always recalibrate, we can always move forward, we can always live with our dignity intact, and we can always move towards the next goal. And that's what I would encourage you to do. So today I will continue the same pattern that I was on yesterday. As soon as I close this video out, I have to record another chapter for a book I'm doing for a client that retained me to ghostwrite a book for him. Now I'm producing the audio version of that book. I already published these books for people on Amazon. After I record a chapter or record a chapter for one client, I'm going to write a chapter for another client. I'll be done with that in the early afternoon. That's when I'll go for a run. I have a treadmill right in this room right next door. I have a television in front of me while I'm running. That's when I watch those Ryan Dice courses on digital marketing. After I watch that digital course, I'll go shower, and I'll move on to the next phase of the journey, which will be creating more digital content that I will use to bring more clients into my business or create value for some of the clients that hire me to do this type of work for them. It's what I encourage you to do. Invest in yourself with a disciplined strategy that will make you stronger in the days, weeks, months, years, decades ahead than you are right now. And I think that's going to be it for today's live journal. I like continuing to do this because it's the equivalent of an accountability log, which used to drive me through prison. And I'll talk a little bit about that tomorrow. So I know it's quite early, particularly out here on the West Coast. It's now 4:02 in the morning, and it's time for me to get on to the next phase of the day. So I don't see any comments here, but if there are, um, if you're watching this later on a record, please leave some comments, and I'm very happy to respond. I'm 100% open and transparent, and there's nothing anybody can't ask me. So wish you success and a productive day. Thank you.